Kansas City, Missouri, June 3rd, 1922. I guess we should just dive in, shall we? Because already from the get-go, we don't know what the frickety frack is happening here. Let me set the grisly scene for you. A man is dead in a hotel room. A woman is unconscious and lying on the floor, gun in hand with a bullet wound in her chest. Her condition is critical. She was taken to the hospital as the bullet had pierced her lung. Take a breath. She may have a hard time at the moment, but you and I can take a breath. The deceased man is Frank Warren Anderson, who works in a department store in Kansas City. He primarily goes by the middle name Warren. The woman is 29-year-old Peggy Beal of Springfield, Illinois, who is a professional trained nurse. They met during World War I in Dayton, Ohio, where they were both stationed during the war, when he was a captain in the aviation service and she was an Army nurse. He was a native of New Jersey, where his parents and relatives lived. Peggy was a native of Ohio. So what brought this on, whatever this is? Well, once again, we got us some tangled webs. Peggy showed up about a week and a half ago to Kansas City, fully with the intention of getting married to Mr. Anderson. He had even introduced her to people as his wife. The two had been exchanging letters and poems, using phrases in Esperanto, which the two had studied together. Sounds romantic and sweet. Well, no, you know, because tangled webs. Police issued this statement made by Peggy while she was in the hospital. Quote, "My name is Peggy Beal. I am 29 years old. I live in Springfield, Illinois. I came to Kansas City with the intention of marrying Frank Warren Anderson. When I arrived, I met him and we went to the Midwest Hotel together. He told me he was married and that he was not divorced yet. Therefore, he could not marry me. There is nothing more to tell. I shot him because he brought me here and could not marry me. Signed, Peggy Beal." End quote. Really, Warren? Really, Peggy? The shot to Peggy's chest was of her own doing, in an attempt to end her life. In the hotel room on the dresser was a book called Thuvia, Maid of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which you will hear of a few times. Open to an illustration of a woman holding a dagger over the form of a man who was lying down. I'll give this for Peggy. She ain't one to hide squat. She also expressed no regret over shooting him at this time. People who know Warren and Peggy believe them both to be people of good breeding and refinement. Now, that book, interestingly, was recommended to Peggy by Warren. He wrote her it was, quote, "the most wonderful book," end quote, and he told her to, quote, "get it by all means," end quote. Well, she did. Peggy's still in the hospital on June 6th, and she's getting what's basically fan mail of sympathy and praise for, quote, "courage and good marksmanship," end quote. One letter said, quote, "Our sympathy is yours. The world needs more girls who have the courage and ability to shoot straight," end quote. So we know that Warren is married and apparently separated from his wife, but hadn't exactly disclosed any of that to Peggy until now. Peggy is divorced from a man named Stephen Beal, who lives in Terre Haute, Indiana, with their 2 teenage sons. He has since remarried. June 7th, Warren's body is still unclaimed. Peggy continues to recover from the bullet wound to her lung, and so far, no charges have been filed against her. Peggy considered herself to be Warren's specimen number 51. She said that he told her, quote, "I have planted the love seed in the hearts of 50 women. He told me on that last night. But the perfect flower of love has not sprung from any of them. I thought it would from your heart, but it hasn't. And so I must try again." "Do you mean with another?" she asked him. His answer brought on the shooting, so I'm assuming he basically said, yeah, with another or another, plural. Quote, "At least I saved some girl from becoming specimen number 52, end quote. We're jumping ahead a month. Not much in the newspapers, but Peggy is still in the hospital and is under arrest, basically. Prosecuting attorney Orr. Quote, Miss Beal shot Anderson while he slept. She had given her love to this man knowing that he was married. They lived together as man and wife. Then he tired of her. He decided to cast her off. She had been reading a book, Thuvia, Maid of Mars. In it, she saw a picture, a girl with a dagger standing over the still form of the man she had killed. Her mind turned to the thought she planned to kill. End quote. Now, this is prosecution's thoughts. Peggy does say this, quote, Warren was not asleep. We had talked. He had told me of his other loves, and we retired. I lay there sobbing in the dark. Our love had died, and my heart was broken. Then, I remember it now, I got up in the dark and groped my way to my trunk, where an old revolver given me by my father lay. I got it. I fired blindly. I don't know how many shots. If he spoke, I did not hear him. I do not know how I hit him, for I never fired a shot before. Then I shot myself. He was not asleep. I knew Warren was a ladies' man. I thought we might take our little house of hearts and sweep the leaves away and make it fit to live in. But it was not to be. We might have been so happy, but I had endured a great deal and something had to break. He took my life, my faith, my spirit, and my belief in life and broke them like twigs. Sometimes you come to a place where you can't go on, and that was where I came. I don't care what happens to me now. End quote. In one of the letters from him found in the room, quote, Love grows from a tiny seed planted in the garden of the heart. Fertilize it with tender words, water it with kisses, and keep it under the warm rays of adoring passion. But when the plant springs up, prune it off its offshoots, pluck off the insects, and then the real love will grow into the most beautiful flower in the world. End quote. Peggy thought she was to be the beautiful flower. The offshoots were his past, she thought. Remove those and their love would grow. But no, she learned that she, like the other previous rivals for his love, was to be discarded, tossed into the trash bin. His aunt would say, quote, Poor Frank. From his childhood, he was a girl fascinator. He made love at school. Hopefully she means more like courtship. Married young. And when his wife quarreled with him because he stayed away from home at nights, he would pull out his love diary, read off the names of girls he had written in it, and taunt her with romances and love affairs he had had with them. Romance seemed to be the bread and butter of his life. He danced well, could sing, and was agreeably entertaining. He had a winning way with him, a flair for women, and was never happy unless in the midst of a riotous party of girls. And he loved to play them off against each other. Took an inordinate pride, one might say, in his curious ability to excite jealousy among the girls of his acquaintance. No aunt ever had a better, more devoted nephew, and no mother a more devoted son. His death under such circumstances as arose with Miss Beal is a dreadful, shocking blow. End quote. August 23rd. Apparently men aren't minding that Peggy will kill for love. She's had 300 proposals of marriage, including from a minister, watch out for that one, and a sea captain. Also a widower in San Diego who thinks they could be pals, and a convict in San Quentin, plus social workers and businessmen. Peggy, though, says she has no intention of marrying again. She's also received a large number of letters from ladies who have had their own hearts destroyed, perhaps seeing her as inspiration. In the letter from the minister, he said to her, quote, I am sure you are not all bad. No woman could have written the wonderful love thoughts that you have written and be bad at heart. I would like to make you my wife and lift you up from the depths of despair. As a minister, it is my duty to offer you a haven in my heart and home. End quote. The sea captain said, quote, If you will marry me, I will see that you forget the past. I am not so terribly handsome or so terribly good, but I would be willing to give every hour in the day to trying to make you happy. If you will say the word, I will get a year's leave from my work and will come to Kansas City at once. End quote. Her preliminary hearing will be coming up soon, health dependent, and plans to continue to state that Warren had promised her he would marry her if she came to Kansas City. And she came to Kansas City and instead found out she was number 51 of his list of ladies' names, which he showed her with statement that he could get 50 more. She killed him because of his deception and to prevent him from hurting any other women. The prosecuting attorney, Cameron Orr, is not going to bother trying to get the death penalty. As we've seen and heard in other cases, trying to get an all-male jury to put a woman to death is difficult. More than likely, she'll be charged with second-degree murder in that case, instead of first-degree. Now it's the end of August, and Peggy has written her story exclusively for Cosmopolitan News Service. At this time, she does not plan on using the insanity defense or the self-defense defense. She's going to ask the jury a question. Quote, after they hear my story, they can say whether I did right or wrong, whether it was better to be free myself and see other girls' hearts enslaved in life worse than death, or whether I had the moral right to kill for their honor, end quote. So just to recap, according to her, she was not aware he was married. She had come to him to get married and found out he had a wife. He promised her divorce from his present wife and then marriage to Peggy. She has now deemed this to be the, quote, universal language of lies of men, end quote. Well, we have heard this before in some previous stories, kids. If she is found guilty, quote, for if I am punished, other girls may take the sentence given me, even death, as a part of the price they must pay. Then my act will not be in vain, end quote. I am not going to put in all of her story that she's having published in the paper, but I will put in some snippets. We're going to first talk about her first husband, Stephen Beal, who she met after she had become a teacher in an industrial school. Quote, ours was a love at first sight, that magic, unexplainable thing which turns feminine heads and sets hearts aflutter. He was my pupil in school for just 3 nights. During those school hours, his eyes never found his textbooks. They were on me constantly. I had to ask him to leave my class. And then we married. There were the first months of golden happiness, end quote. Then the first baby came, Junior. Peggy's health would take a hit, and her husband, at least according to her, lost his love for her. She doesn't say in what way her health declined or if this was something akin to postpartum depression. I don't know. She continued, quote, it was just before another little soul was to come into the world, and I had hoped the second baby might change the bitterness of our hearts, that my tragedy occurred, end quote. She goes on to tell the story of a good friend of hers named Lily, who had come over and was holding her child, Junior, who had woken up with the sound of his father coming home. Lily and Stephen Beal would go into the room to quiet Junior down. Peggy would follow and heard Stephen tell Lily those 3 little words that a woman would want to hear, but not told by her husband to her good friend. The two would kiss and then realize that Peggy had heard and seen everything. Quote, that moment was the first realization I had of a great truth, which has since dawned on me, that all men are polygamous at heart. I have learned the truth of it since, end quote. Now, she puts men into 3 classes. Quote, first, the good man in the eyes of the world, who in his secret dreams visions the loves that might have been and keeps their memory locked within his heart. Second, the brazen roux, whose loves are notorious, who makes no pretense at living the theory of today, one man for one woman. Third, and they are in the majority, the cheater, the man whose loves are hidden from each other, but which exist in every city of every land, end quote. Now, this period of time gets confusing, but the baby she was carrying at the time had been born dead, and Lily, her now ex-friend, had left town. Now, Peggy would stay with her husband, and 3 years after this, she would have a son named Louis. But of course, the memory of what had happened with her husband was still there, and as she says, divorce was eventual. And as with her first son, she would have the same health issues with her second, being the sole mother of 2 and getting them started in school. Again, I don't know of what sort of health issues, but again, perhaps it was postpartum depression or something similar, because she would be ordered to a sanitarium, which was a typical treatment back then. Her ex-husband, Stephen, had been remarried and he was doing well, so he asked to take the boys under his care. She goes on to speak of another man to whom she would eventually meet and get engaged to. They would set a wedding date, she would board a train to meet him, and when she arrived at the station, she would be met by a woman who would tell her that her fiancé was dying. From what it sounds like and the period of time, he may have had the Spanish flu. He would pass away the day after she saw him. The shock and hurt of his death would send her back to the sanitarium. It would take months to recover, but eventually she would get herself out and would try to find work. Remember, now she was divorced and her ex-husband had their children. It was while she was having something to eat at a restaurant during one of her work scavenging trips, she met Warren Anderson. He flirted with her. She wasn't in the frame of mind to repel, she simply did nothing. But she would go back to that restaurant another time, and there he would be. He would tell her all about himself, and he would invite her to the pictures. She said, quote, "It was wrong to flirt. I knew it then, know it now. Why do girls accept advances from strange men? In my case, it was loneliness. It cannot be so in all, however, but no loneliness, not even mine, justified my action. Will girls ever learn? They are the objects of the hunter. Man is primitive. He loves the chase. To him, the meaning of a pretty girl is but a conquest, the same as the slaying of the game which he goes after with rod and gun. When man hunts woman's heart, he hunts with honeyed words and pretty lies, and he kills just as the huntsman killed. Women are by nature seekers after the truth. In all things but the giving of hearts, they look deep into motives and values. But with love, women never question." End quote. So after some meetups, Warren was leaving the city, and Peggy knew she was falling in love. They would write to each other love letters. And in one of those letters, Warren asked Peggy to come to him, that they would be married. So here she thought she would get that band of gold that would make everything okay. He met her at the train station and allegedly told her the truth. Quote, "I am sorry. Sorry I lied to you. I should have told you before, but we cannot marry now." End quote. Well, because he was already married. And then he would tell her that it was just a matter of weeks because he was seeking a divorce and then they could marry. So basically he broke her heart, then stuck one of those teeny tiny pinky band-aids on it. She said, quote, "It was not too late. I could have turned back. It is never, never too late for any girl. There may be heartaches and sorrow. The heart may die, but it is never too late to turn back from the married man. I made that mistake, a mistake no girl can make and save herself the consequences. For while the man-made law may be that men may play with many loves, women can love but one man at one time, and no man's love has ever been great enough to be divided between two women." End quote. But she didn't do this at the time. Warren allegedly would say to her, quote, "I have told them all that my wife is coming. You must pose as she." End quote. And she would allow this, though later she would regret it. George Birmingham, Peggy's attorney, has been corresponding with women all over the place. I'm assuming women that Warren had on his list. Birmingham said, quote, "This man was typical of all men. He made love to every pretty face he met and thought he could escape the penalty." End quote. September 5th, 1922. Peggy is free on $5,000 bond after appearing for her arraignment on a charge of second-degree murder. She only just got out of the hospital the day before. The bullet wound had been in her lung, hence the 3 months of recovery, and as soon as she was released, she had been arrested. Her lawyer, George Birmingham, would say, quote, "Peggy Beal is alone, friendless, and without a cent in the world, but she wants to tell her story. Peggy Beal would rather destroy herself, will destroy herself, in fact, if she cannot be vindicated in the eyes of the public." End quote. September 20th, 1922. Letter from Warren found regarding the book in question. Quote, "Dearest Peg, I have just finished reading one of the most wonderful books, Thuvia, Maid of Mars. Honestly, sweetheart, I never knew I was such a big crybaby. I read it with a handkerchief in the left hand, and I had to use it constantly to clear my visage. If you have not read it, by all means, get a copy." End quote. One of the things that gave Peggy a kick in the pants to get well was a telegram she had received from her youngest son, Louis, about 13. Quote, "Tell Mama I love her, and I want her to get well." End quote. Her other son is now about 16. Both still live with their father, again, her ex-husband, in Terre Haute. October 4th. Peggy has been rearrested. She was indicted by a grand jury, and that the indictment had been kept secret until they could catch her. She had been out on a $5,000 bond. October 23rd. So we're being introduced to the term Sheik, which Peggy is using to describe Anderson. As far as I know, the term Sheik in these times was to describe a handsome, desirable man, taken from the Rudolph Valentino film, The Sheik. Now, I love me some Rudolph Valentino. I have to admit, I wouldn't watch The Sheik, though. Watch Son of the Sheik. It's a better film. Anywho, in outlining her possible future testimony, Peggy would say, quote, Anderson and I loved. He was my perfect lover, the Sheik. I did not know he was married until I had come to him. When he, the deceiver, told me of his wife, he said he was divorcing her. And then he told me of his 50 other loves. He wrote their names for me. Girls in Chicago, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Indianapolis, St. Louis, Germantown, Pennsylvania, Collingswood, New Jersey, and Dayton, Ohio. I cannot help it. Life is but a game of hearts, my Sheik told me. I asked him how many more were to be added to that list of his, in which he placed my name last. He said he did not know, but there would be many. And so I killed him. Killed to save those other girls who were to enter his life from a fate such as mine. End quote. Now, the state prosecution, again, don't see this all the same way as Peggy does. Anthony Nugent, first assistant to the prosecutor, said, quote, Peggy Beal is a modern Thuvia, Maid of Mars, the fiction character of Edgar Rice Burroughs. At least it was a book of Thuvia's love which led Peggy Beal to slay. She was jealous of this man who had a wife she knew about. She was reading Thuvia, saw the pictures of the woman slaying her lover, and in premeditation she killed. Peggy Beal's case has attracted nationwide attention due to her unusual claim of justification in slaying to save other girls' hearts. End quote. George Birmingham would say, quote, Peggy Beal will be the only witness for the defense. She will tell her story. If the jury agrees the Sheik should be slain, she will be freed. If Sheik love is right, then my client is willing to pay the penalty. End quote. October 24th, jury deliberated for about 3 hours and took 4 ballots. We'll get to their judgment in a minute, but let's hear a few snippets from the trial. Prosecution, quote, Peggy Beal is 32 years old, which is a discrepancy from what the newspapers had. She looks 20, even with the sharp-featured beauty which was hers before the tragedy turned to the hardness of a pallid prisoner of the law. She was married and divorced after the birth of her second child, the eldest now 15 years old, living with her father in Terre Haute, Indiana. She met Anderson in a flirtation, meeting they loved. She in her heart, she said, while he but professed his affection, that she gave herself to him even after he had confessed that his invalid wife had not divorced him. End quote. Dr. H.E. Moss, coroner. Quote, his eyes were closed in death. He had not moved from the moment the bullet struck him. He had been in bed. The covers of the bed were not rumpled. I cannot swear he was asleep when shot, but his body had all the appearance of such a situation. End quote. What Peggy told the court. Quote, Anderson asked me to marry him in Dayton, and I told him I would give my answer in June. She testified. Twice she visited him in Kansas City. She asked him to marry her, she said. Quote, I was nearly stunned when he told me his wife had tuberculosis, and he could find no grounds for divorce. I asked him what I was going to do, and he said, do as you please. End quote. He told her, she asserted, that he had similarly broken the hearts of 50 other women. She said she could not recall shooting him, but remembered shooting herself. This was from the Brunswick News, October 25th. So, what was the verdict? Peggy was acquitted. She would serve no time for the murder of Frank Warren Anderson. Apparently, Sheik love is now a new unwritten law regarding provocation for murder, potentially saving other women from the so-called Sheik. Remember, we've heard similar things before in these kinds of court cases. Peggy, the murderer, is not so much the one on trial. It's the man she killed who seems to actually be the one on trial. Her attorney, George Birmingham. Quote, the jury's decision makes the defense an unwritten law for unmarried women. It means that women, as in Mrs. Beal's case, who have not the protection of marriage vows, may seek the solace of a married woman who has an unwritten law to guard her. For if she lived as a wife with her soulmate, and he made promises of marriage to her, and led her to love him and give herself to him, it was right and just she be given the same means of seeking protection for herself and other women. The unfaithful lover and the sinful husband are in reality the same. End quote. Mrs. Anderson, Frank's widow, declined to say anything about this outcome. She did say at the time of the tragedy, though, that she had known nothing about her husband's alleged numerous affairs, but she had suspected he may have been untrue. October 25th. After the brief trial and her acquittal, Peggy walked out of court and after thanking the jury said, quote, "Now I'm going to stay in Kansas City and make good," end quote. The fear with this verdict was that this would open the doors to some other similar murders of women killing men for being sheiks to save other women and getting acquitted. And I would have to say that did happen to some degree. Whether that was really because of this trial or not, I couldn't say. Well, blimey, that was a doozy. I wonder what I'll have for you next week. See you.